Chapter 13. Shark kills 2 in New Jersey Creek. A third boy survives, but injuries are grave. July 13th, 1916, Elm Hills, New Jersey. A boy and a young man were killed yesterday, July 12th, by a monster shark that made a shocking appearance in the Matawan Creek in New Jersey. Lester Stillwell, 11, was killed while swimming with friends in the town of Matawan. Minutes later, Stanley Fisher, 24, was killed as he bravely attempted to rescue young Lester. Further up the creek, Chet Roscoe, 10, encountered the shark as he swam by himself. He managed to escape and ran into town to alert residents. His cries of warning were ignored, with most residents dismissing his story as a prank. The boy did not give up and later attempted to warn his friends who were swimming behind the Templar tile factory. It was during these efforts that the lad fell into the jaws of the monstrous shark. He was rescued moments later when Captain Thomas A. Wilson shot the shark with a Civil War musket, scaring the beast away. The brave youth was rushed to St. Peter's Hospital in New Brunswick. Injuries to his leg are described as extremely grave. Chapter 14. Pictures floated around in and out of Chet's mind. Fuzzy pictures, men lifting him off a dock, the inside of Dr. J's motor car, the white walls and white sheets of the hospital, unsmiling doctors shaking their heads, a pretty nurse with a soft voice, and Uncle Jerry, who always seemed to be sitting right next to Chet. Was Chet asleep? Was he awake? Was he alive, or was he dead? It was 2 days before Chet decided for sure he was alive, and 3 more before he understood what had happened to him, that the shark had ripped away part of his calf. Another few seconds, and that shark would have taken off his whole leg. "It will heal," the doctor said, patting Chet on the shoulder. "It'll take some time, but your leg will heal." "The miracle kid," said Uncle Jerry. "That's what the newspapers are calling you, and it's true." By then, Chet had heard about the others, the boy attacked a mile down the creek from Elm Hills, and the man who jumped in to try and save him. Both were dead. Chet's room was filled with flowers and cards from people all over the country. But none of this mattered to him. His leg hurt worse than it had when the shark was biting him. The medicine they gave him made him feel sick and woozy. He wanted Mama and Papa, but their train was still making its way across the country. Every time Chet fell asleep, he woke up suddenly, shaking with fear, his bed soaked with sweat. The terror faded some when he was awake, but somehow that shark was always lurking, its black killer eyes watching him, its bloody teeth glistening. Chet had never felt so alone. Chapter 15. It was Chet's 6th morning in the hospital when there was a knock at his door. He sat up, sure it was Mama and Papa, but it wasn't. Dewey, Sid, and Monty stood in the doorway. Uncle Jerry was right behind them. The hospital was a 2-hour trip from Elm Hills. Had the guys really come all this way to see him? They all looked a little scared, and Chet felt nervous. Were they still mad at him? Chet raised his hand and gave the briefest, tiniest wave, and just like that, the guys came barreling across the room, fighting each other for a spot on his little bed. Their jostling hurt his leg, but Chet couldn't have cared less. "I'll be in the hallway, kiddo," Uncle Jerry said. "I think that pretty nurse likes me." The door closed and all the guys started talking at once. "They dynamited the creek. A guy caught a shark in the bay, says it's the same shark. It was 10 feet long. They cut open its stomach and they found human bones." Of course, Uncle Jerry had told Chet all of this, but he didn't stop the guys from telling him again. He liked the sound of their voices around him. He hoped they would never stop talking. They told him that Captain Wilson was a celebrity, that newspaper reporters were coming from around the world just to talk to him. "Your uncle says your leg will be okay," Dewey said. "You're going to have a huge scar," Sid said. He sounded almost jealous. Chet hadn't looked too closely at his leg when the nurse changed his bandage. That was when it hurt the most, when they washed the wound. He had to keep his eyes closed tight and bite down on a rag to keep from screaming until the cleaning was done. A chunk of flesh was missing from his calf. He'd have more than just a scar. He would have a limp, too. "Just like me," Uncle Jerry had said. "Won't slow you down a bit." "Minnie keeps asking about you," Dewey said. Chet wondered what Minnie would think of a boy with a limp. Sid moved a little closer to Chet. "We're sorry," he whispered. "We're sorry for everything," said Monty. Sid looked like he was about to cry. "It's all my fault." "What?" Chet said. "You didn't put the shark in the creek." Sid laughed a little and wiped his eyes on his sleeve. "We should have listened to you," Monty said. "If we had gotten out of the water, you wouldn't have gotten bitten. And if you hadn't come," Dewey said, "we'd be—" "But if I hadn't played that stupid prank," Chet said, "you would have believed me." "You saved my life," Sid said. "You guys saved me," Chet said. He swallowed hard, and they all sniffled a little. Then a hush came over the room, and in that quiet moment, Chet realized something. He and the guys would always be tied together by the terrible things they'd seen, by what they'd done for each other. It was a while before Sid said, "We're calling a truce, no more pranks." As usual, no one argued with Sid. It was settled. The guys stayed all afternoon until Uncle Jerry poked his head in and said it was time to go. The guys lingered until Uncle Jerry shooed them right out the door. "Wait for me," Uncle Jerry told them. Then he closed the door and came over to Chet's bed. "Your mama called the hospital," he said. "She and your papa will be here after dinner tonight." Chet smiled. "You know," Uncle Jerry said, straightening the sheet, "I had an idea. Thought I'd mention it to you." He cleared his throat. "Maybe your papa would like to help me run the diner," Uncle Jerry said. "It's a busy place. I think he might enjoy it. We do well enough, and I'm sure he wouldn't mind having more time to myself." It took Chet a few seconds to understand what Uncle Jerry was saying. "Your papa might decline if it's time to settle. Your papa might decide it's time to settle down," Uncle Jerry said. "I'm not sure he'll say yes, but I guess it's worth a try, don't you think?" Chet opened his mouth to say something, but the words seemed to be all stuck together, so he just nodded. "Okay then, kiddo, it's a plan." Chet lay there for a while after Uncle Jerry left. He thought about Mama and Papa. He couldn't wait to introduce them to the guys and to Captain Wilson. He struggled to keep his eyes open, but it had been a long day. Before long, he dozed off. He dreamed that he was an old man sitting in a diner telling a story to a gang of boys. He told them about a shark in a creek, a huge killer shark with bloody jaws and coal-black eyes. He described how the shark had chased him, how it scared him out of its wits, but in the end, the beast couldn't get him because Chet hadn't been alone, because his friends had reached out for him. They'd held him tight, and they never let him go.